Morning, everybody. Got the Great Wall Street Journal on my driveway this morning, just like Monday, every day, Monday through Saturday. I've gone through the whole thing and I've pulled out, I think, 5 articles today that I think you'll enjoy and will make you think a bit. And if you think a bit, even if you disagree with some of my observations, that's my goal. I hope you see the news and you think deeper than what some of the media wants you to think, and that would be my goal. So let's dig in. So first article, COVID is killing younger minorities. So why is that? Well, if we look at minorities as a whole, their median age of death is lower than whites, period. Across the board, by the way. You just go across all minorities. So, for instance, if you look at the percentage of the population that die before the age of 55, only 3% of white people died below the age of 55. 8% of Asians, 11% of blacks, 18% of Hispanics, and hang on, 24% of American Indians. 24% never make it to age 55. It's just amazing. So, so when you look at COVID deaths proportionally affecting minorities higher, you got to look at it and say, well, they already die as a proportion, and the same factors that may be attributing to that death rate may be the same factors that attribute to the COVID death rate. So it is still interesting. It's like anything, it's very complex when you dig into the data. And sometimes the media, you don't see a deep dive into the data anymore. Very seldom. You see these short articles and they'll pick one factor and then they take that out as a fact. That may be a fact, but by itself, it doesn't explain a very complex death rate among minorities. So if you look at what the experts are really looking at, we've got 5 major categories that they've looked at and saying they may contribute to a higher death rate among minorities. First of all, public transportation. They have a higher reliance on public transportation. They rely on it to get to work, so they're on it very frequently and all through the year. Public transportation, as we saw in New York and some of the other larger cities, appeared to be a contributing factor. Though people tell me that for once, a lot of the trains now are actually cleaned every day, and they're seeing a big improvement in that area. Health and diabetes, much higher in minority populations. The health is overall, the healthiness of these individuals overall is lower, and a much higher incidence of diabetes. And I learned this when trying to travel with requiring dialysis. If I was traveling to a heavily minority area, I would have much more difficulty getting an open chair to do my dialysis in that city. And in fact, in many cases, it was impossible. Every chair was filled. If I was going to a primarily white area, I didn't have that problem. It's just amazing. And again, kidney dialysis is a lot of diabetes patients get there because the diabetes eventually kills their kidney. So access to health care is less among the minorities. The good access to health care is less. Jobs, you look at a lot of the jobs, meatpacking jobs. Who does meatpacking? Minorities. So these are high density jobs. And by the way, they're not jobs that you can do from your home. So it's not like they can pack meat from their home. It just can't be happening. So a lot of white people had that advantage of staying home and staying isolated, when in fact minorities, especially poorer minorities, didn't have that advantage. And then lastly, I think this is a thing that's affected American Indians the most, is density of living. And American Indians have the highest density of living of any group in the U.S. And multi-generational living, again, many minorities have this same attribute. Their culture lives together with multiple generations. So again, any disease that you have or any infection you have gets passed to a larger family group a lot faster because they're all living in the same area. So, what policies could you put in place to counter these risk factors? Well, those are real complex and in many cases cultural risk factors that are in place. And how do you change a culture, right? Very difficult to do, especially density of living. If the culture is that you want to live with your grandparents, how do you mandate that in laws produced by Congress? Education, you could drive up education and make the job levels rise as you go forward. That would be one way you could do, though we don't hear too much about that anymore. But you could raise the education level. Get Indians a better health care. Well, their health care right now is run by the government. Who do you want to run it? The government's failed miserably with Indian health care, miserably. And many Indians have been flown out in Arizona here, as I'm watching it, to major hospitals across, including Mayo Clinic, across the area. Because Indian hospitals, you know what they did? They sent COVID patients back home. Yeah, to high density living. Does this make sense? This is what your government did for you. This is their healthcare system. So I think when you look at this, you find out it's very complex. Little story. I went on a trip, a mission trip down the Amazon River, up the headwaters of the Amazon, really technically, and built a clinic for a medical doctor up there, a mission doctor, basically. He was a religious mission doctor. So, and I remember we attended one church on the weekend to just go into a remote village. This was a village you had to walk to. The only way you could reach it was by the river or by trails. No vehicle could get to it. And so one of our guys happened to be 78 years old. Really a spry guy that really was doing well in his old age, and came along on the trip and was a great contributor to the trip. When they introduced him, they told the group there in their native language, the Indian language, that he was 78 years old. And there was an audible noise came up from the crowd, like they just couldn't believe it. Ah. And later, when the service ended, the women came up, the older women came up to touch him. And it really was an awkward situation because they were rubbing their hands over him. I thought he was good luck because he had lived so long. The average age, by the way, in the Amazon River Delta there is probably 40, 45, is an old man. So he was almost twice that age. And so interesting things about average ages of different cultures. Second article, solar fails California. As all of us know, California has made a dramatic investment and in law mandating increased solar usage. I think all new buildings, all new houses, single family houses have to have solar on the roof when they're built now. So a massive investment and tax credits to drive solar usage. The government's mandated that 60% of the energy has to be from renewable sources by the year 2030, 60%. So what have you heard this weekend? Who had electricity and who didn't? Well, California. The sun kept shining, by the way, all weekend, and California had rolling blackouts for the weekend. Interesting to say, how can that happen? So 250,000 residents were part of that rolling blackouts in many areas, Friday and Saturday night. By the way, during one of the hottest parts of the season, very high temperatures out there. Everybody's got their air conditioning on max. And here we go. Solar power, free power from the sun. The sun always shines. What a great deal. And no air conditioning. So this was different, by the way, from the previous shutdowns caused by the high winds. Remember, power companies were shutting power down because these lines, these high voltage lines, went through forested areas, and they were afraid that the winds would knock the lines down, cause a fire, and destroy multiple towns like it did before. So this was different. This is a rolling shutdown because they don't have enough power. They're out of power. They can't provide the needs of the California residents. Think about that. So California spent 20 years greening its grid with large-scale renewable energy projects. 1/3 of the typical needs of California, the grid, come from renewable sources right now. So they've been reducing coal. Coal is almost down to no plants left. Natural gas, they've been dropping. And in fact, one natural gas plant that had a lifespan about 30 years is 10 years into the lifespan, they're closing it down. And nuclear plants, by the way, one of the best sources. And by the way, not renewable, but very low emissions. But the renewable people don't want that. They hate nuclear, regardless if it's low emissions. So what is the issue? Early evening, solar output is dropping dramatically. The sun goes down, solar energy availability drops dramatically. What happens with demand? Everybody's getting home and turning on the air conditioners, and demand is skyrocketing. So we have a whole grid system that is dependent on solar energy that doesn't match what the demand cycles are. This is a bad plan, a bad design by any person with any intelligence looking at this. So how did California do this? Well, they relied on buying from neighboring states when this happened. They could buy from Arizona, Nevada, and did quite often. And so what happened this time? Well, Arizona's real hot. Arizona all last week was 112, 115 degrees every day. Nevada was very hot. So they're using all their electricity. So I like what one expert from one of the universities says how to solve this. We need huge banks of batteries. That's right. Because then we can store the solar energy when we're getting too much during the day, and then we can have it available to us at night. Not a hybrid plan, by the way. They're not suggesting that maybe we shouldn't have shut too many of these natural gas plants down. No, we'll fix solar. We'll patch huge banks of batteries. By the way, battery in your car. If you live in Arizona, California, how often do you change your battery? About 2 years is what I found it lasts. Okay, in this heat out here. If you get 3 years out of it, you're very fortunate. Just think of the maintenance costs of those huge banks of batteries out there in the fields. Unbelievable way to fix this. And by the way, the expense, who's going to pay for them? California already pays twice as much as Washington State for electricity. So this solar energy is not cheap, right? By the way, they pay 1/3 as much, 1/3 more than Nevada pays. So their system, their green energy system, costs them a lot of money and leaves them short when they need it the most, when temperatures go up dramatically. And we need to buy more batteries to fix this system. So the cost will go up, right? By the way, a little thing you may not understand is during the day, California has a surplus of solar energy, and they don't need it. So what do they do with it? So sometimes they curtail other generators, drop them down to use the solar energy. But in some cases, they send it free, or in some cases, actually pay other states to take the energy. So all this money that the Californians have paid to go solar, right? They've got an excess of it in the middle of the day when they don't need it. And so they pay other states or give it away for free to other states because they got to get it off the grid. They can't keep it on the grid. A complex system, these power grids are. So interesting perspective on California. Is this what you want in your state? Be careful what you ask for when you go primarily solar. Make sure this is set up so that it's demand driven. Can it match the demand curves? And it's doing a very poor job at matching the demand curves. I know in our state we get a huge discount if we don't use electricity between 3 p.m. in the afternoon and 8 p.m. at night. In fact, it's half the rate. Electricity is twice the rate during that time period. I'm sorry. And so because they're trying to match demand curves with market influencers, which work pretty well, works with us very well. So third article, Democrats are calling for a postal hearing. So what you've heard, is a lot of news lately of the post office not being able to handle a massive increase in mail-in ballots close to election day. So they're going to call in the Postmaster General and I think a member from the Postal Board. They're going to have hearings. Well, we've had this discussion before. They won't have hearings. This is too close to an election. They're going to yell and throw insinuations at these people, and they're not going to listen. They're going to use their entire time up to throw accusations at them because the cameras are rolling and they want to be on camera right before. Can you imagine Kamala Harris being there? Oh yeah, she won't miss this, right? Well, I don't know if she's on that board. Maybe she's not on the board. She probably is not. But they're going to have their people there, and they're going to be prepped for it, and they hope to help their election. So here's what's really happening. So the post office is saying it can't handle ballots if, they are mailed too close to election day. So the election officials are saying, look, it takes us a while to deliver ballots and takes us a while to send them back to the election office. So if you have confirmation bias, look it up, by the way. I'm not going to explain it here, but if you have confirmation bias, you say Trump's doing this. This all started when he assigned a new Postmaster General who donates to the Republican Party. So obviously he's a crook and he's been put in there to crush mail by ballot, which Trump has said helps Democrats. Research hasn't showed that so much, but he believes it. So therefore, if you're an enemy of Trump and you have confirmation bias that everything has a reason and it's going to contribute to Trump's election, this is why he's doing it. But look at what the post office is really saying. They're saying, look, and they've said this for the longest time. If you use first class mail, you must allow 1 week for the mail to get there. Okay. By the way, this message was sent out by one of the council members, lawyer type persons for the post office, before the latest Postmaster General, who's donated to Trump. Let's keep putting that in there. Was appointed. So this news is not new news to the election councils around the country. Consider this, how the states are implementing mail-in voting with this knowledge, right? How are they implementing? New York can request an absentee ballot a week before the election. So you can request, as long as it's postmarked, 1 week before the election. So that application has to go to the election office. They have to read it, analyze it, and say, yes, you're allowed to have one. Send you a ballot by mail, okay? And then you have to send it back in that 1 week. Well, the post office has already told you that all you can do is count on the application getting to the election office in time, not the return ballot getting there and the ballot being returned, right? Which, if you look at it technically, it would take 3 weeks. Application to get 1 week to the person to mail in the ballot, return the ballot, okay, to get a new ballot in 1 week, and then return the ballot in 1 week. So it'd take 3 week cycle. They're giving you 1 week to do everything. Michigan, The request for absentee ballots must be received 4 days before the election. Okay, so the election office receives it 4 days before the election, and they're supposed to process that application, mail you the ballot. You're supposed to complete it and mail it back in 4 days. The post office said, not going to happen. And our experience using the post office says, I mean, which of us believe that a first-class mail can make it in less than 2 to 3 days, right? That's the best case, right? And probably the average case is around a week. So one election office official in the New York office has said that the post office 7-day deadline is unrealistic. I love it. Not my problem, post office. You need to fix the problem. And I suppose, by the way, one of the things in the COVID relief bill that Democrats had, the $3.5 trillion bill, was a $25 billion for the post office to handle the losses from the pandemic. And they thought that would help the upcoming election and mail-in ballots. Do you really think giving the post office this huge infrastructure with 200,000 employees, I think, do you think giving them $25 billion a few months before the election is really going to change how they handle 132 million ballots twice, by the way, sending it out there to the recipients and then mailing it back to the election office? You really think that's going to change overnight? Going to fix a post office that is a huge infrastructure overnight? So, are you seeing any media explain this 1 week demand from the post office and challenge the election officials? Are you seeing any of it push back on election officials? So look, why are you doing this 4 days, Michigan? Why are you doing this 4 days before election? This won't work, and anybody with any common sense knows it won't work. And the post office has told you it won't work. No, the way we're going to fix this is giving the post office money and going to bring in their officials. And by the way, one of the things the Democrats want to do is say, post office, you can't implement any changes between now and the election. Any changes you can't do, because if you do, we think you're doing it on purpose to sabotage the election. So on this hearing, will they let the Postmaster General explain this 1 week mail process? Will they let him explain that? I'm convinced they cannot let him explain how stupid the election officials are right now, and how you can't change a huge government entity as the post office within 2 months to be able to handle another 132 million times 2 ballots in the mail. Interesting. We'll see what happens in another week or so when they bring the officials in. But fourth item, football slashes budgets. University football programs are slashing the budgets. The issue is the major colleges are losing about 50% of their sports income by canceling football games. So they need to slash costs. And I thought it was interesting, a few universities came back and said it really is no big deal because it won't affect the university general budgets because athletic programs don't contribute to them. Think about this. Multi-million-dollar athletic programs that aren't contributing to the general budget. So what do they do with this money? They build expensive stadiums, locker rooms. They pay head coaches multi-million-dollar contracts for multi-million-dollar years, right, that are guaranteed. And all these guaranteed salaries, even to assistant coaches, $1 million contracts. But don't worry, we don't contribute to universities, the general budget, so it won't affect the classrooms, so no big deal. So my observation and my question today is, why are these athletic programs on campuses anyways? Why are they there? If they don't contribute to education, which is the primary reason we have universities, why are they there? So and you could push back on me. They do contribute indirectly. So TV advertisements during football programs may entice donations, may entice people to attend universities there. It may. I don't know what the number is. Home games bring in alumni, and alumni bring in donations. Donors donate large sums of money to football programs and get nice seats for home games. It's a well-known, kickback. Call it what you want. I'll call it a kickback. So general budgets may be affected by the loss of donations due to alumni not having a reason to come to the university and see the needs and donate. So we'll see. By the way, universities are also looking at loans from their university that they, the campus they sit on. Remember, they're not helping the university, but now they're looking at universities for loans. Amazing to me to get through this period. Another issue this has caused, a lot of these athletic departments have gone into debt for huge infrastructure changes and these facilities that they build, and now they can't pay that debt. So how are they going to pay that debt? Are they going to go back to the universities and say, you need to help us out? If I was the university board, I'd say, you haven't helped us out all along, and now you're depending on us. I think it's time for us to look at these large university athletic programs and say, how do they fit with an overall strategy and vision of the learning of a university? Number 5, a Biden victory calms the storm. So the Republic right now, many people tell us, is in mortal peril. Mortal peril. That's what they tell us. It's all going to fail. And so let's assume that Biden wins. Overnight, you can see the changes coming. Overnight, coronavirus, the federal government will no longer be the enemy, but they'll be the savior. They'll be what's helping cities recover from this pandemic overnight. Fascism overnight will end. Many riots may end overnight. Right? Actually, Trump supporters will probably be relieved that they don't have to explain Trump's actions all the time. That Facebook will just die down overnight. The country will be saved overnight. Just think what happens overnight. And so if this happens, you need to look at it as a huge dishonesty of many people over the past 4 years. Remember, if the Republic is in mortal peril, okay, only until the next fellow moves into the White House, it wasn't in peril to begin with. So, I'm going to say that again. If the Republic is in mortal peril, only until the next fellow moves into the White House, it wasn't in peril before Biden, in this case, or Kamala takes the presidency. So just a different perspective, looking ahead to the future and saying what will happen. And you ought to look ahead and say, if this happens, what did it mean? Does it mean that much that the world becomes a better place to live because one person moves into the White House? You need to think that through very well. So hope you have a great week, and hope Monday is a great start to it, and hope you enjoyed and the thinking points, the thought points, observations around the news of the day. And cheers, see you tomorrow.